Hey, what's up guys, Paulo Munoz here. Welcome back to another video. This time I have something slightly different from the usual tutorial, just because I've been playing around with the 3Dconnexion keyboard for the past 2 weeks. And although it is just a keyboard, I thought I should share some of the insights into how I set it up and how I make it work for my tools and for my workflow so that you can do the same thing. All right, so let's go ahead and jump straight into it. So I've been playing around with this keyboard for the past 2 weeks, and to be honest, it is pretty comfortable, for what a keyboard is mostly used for, right? Like typing. So this video won't be a review of the keyboard itself because, let's be honest, it's just a keyboard. But instead, I'm going to give you an insight into my current workspace and how I've been customizing it to work for me and for my tools, which is, actually pretty cool. And I was surprised to see how much it actually improves my workflows. All right, so here I have ZBrush open, and I'll use this as an example of how I set up some of the shortcuts and the automations for this specific tool. I covered the setup of the 3D Space Mouse Pro in a different video, so this time I'm going to focus on the keyboard. But just to give you a quick idea, I set up the keys on the left-hand side of the mouse to toggle the ZBrush user interface on and off. I also reduce the speed or the movement intensity of the mouse itself just when I'm using ZBrush so that I can make more precise movements and rotation. And this is especially handy when I'm in the detailing process of a sculpt. I also have the undo shortcut mapped to the top left button or the number 1, and the solo mode mapped to number 2, so I can easily isolate the pieces that I'm focusing on. Another useful set of shortcuts are the B and the N keys, which are mapped to the top right buttons of the mouse, so I can easily access all my brushes and a list of the subtools when I'm working in a full screen mode. Now here's where the extra keys of the 3Dconnexion keyboard come in handy. To keep working on this full screen mode, I have created a macro in ZBrush that I can trigger with the first customizable key, so the number 1, and this custom macro will select the Z modeler brush and reduce the brush size to 1, so I can just do a little bit of box modeling with this tool. I have also mapped the modifier keys that I use the most in ZBrush to the bottom right of my mouse. So you'll see me pressing this button that I've mapped to the Alt key with my thumb, and this is just to change polygroups as I add geometry or change the geometry of this piece. The Alt key is pretty important, and it's probably the most used key in ZBrush, so I have it set it up in the most comfortable and closest button to my thumb on the mouse. Now to get out of this box modeling mode, I have another macro in ZBrush that I've mapped to the second customizable button. So this macro toggles off the polygroup, like the color ID, and then selects the move brush. And if I accidentally make a mistake, I can go ahead and undo that from the mouse button that I've set up for that action. Now the great thing about these customizable extra keys of the keyboard is that you can set up any shortcut that you want. I personally think they are perfect to trigger custom macros or any other action that requires more than one step. So for instance, when I'm sculpting, I like to do quick render tests in ZBrush to see how everything is looking. So to improve the quality of the render, I change the document to AA-half or anti-alias, just for a sharper and nicer image. And then I press render. So all of those simple steps can be recorded into a macro in ZBrush, and then I can trigger it from the custom key number 3. In the same way, I can go ahead and press the custom key number 4, and that will trigger another macro that brings me back to the full size of the canvas and selects the sculpting material that I was working with. Now, if I go ahead and bring the left tray and add the macros palette in there, you'll see that I have quite a few custom ones, and some of them are pretty random. If I press the menu button in my mouse, I can bring in the settings for the 3D Space Mouse Pro, as well as the keyboard. And this is where you can assign your own shortcuts. If you click on buttons, you'll see the 12 extra keys that you have at your disposal. And you might notice that most of my shortcuts are using the Control plus the Alt plus the Shift and then a letter. And this is just so that I don't mess up any of the existing shortcuts on the program, because it's less likely that a shortcut is going to use all of those modifiers at once. So Control, Alt, Shift, and then choosing a letter or a number. So I'm going to show you how easy it is to assign these keys. I have already assigned a couple of shortcuts to the number 5 and 6 extra keys of the keyboard. So in ZBrush, I can go ahead and hold Control and Alt at the same time, and then click on any button in the UI that I want. So I'll do that for my custom macro. Right after you click, you can go ahead and press any key combination you want to assign for that specific button or switch, and that's pretty much it. I'll repeat the same process for another macro so that I can finish mapping my number 5 and my number 6 extra keys in the keyboard. Now, these macros are nothing too fancy either. I use it to simplify what I see on the canvas and basically to better judge the silhouette and the shapes of what I'm working with. So if I press the number 5 extra key, ZBrush will change the background to black and set the working material to be a flat white color. And this just makes it easier to see the shapes without any details or shading distractions. The other macro, which I mapped to the number 6, is basically to revert those changes that I did on the background and the material. So very similar to the macro that I showed you earlier on. Now on the number pad, you also have 4 extra buttons that you can customize. So I went ahead and assigned a couple of shortcuts to the number 3 and 4 buttons with the Alt 5 and the Alt 6 commands. So these two commands are already shortcuts that come by default with ZBrush and allow you to switch between the lowest subdivision and the highest subdivision of the selected subtool with one single button. Another cool feature about the 3Dconnexion keyboard is that the number pad actually comes as a separate section. So this part of the keyboard is Bluetooth and you can charge it from any USB-C cable. When I originally saw this keyboard, I thought, what's the point of splitting the keyboard into 2 pieces, right? But after using it for a couple of weeks, I realized that it's actually pretty handy to be able to move the number pad away so that it creates more space in your desk. Actually, as a side note, I found a really cool use for the little legs that you can flick underneath the keyboard. And because the number pad itself is Bluetooth, it is really easy to just hang it on top of the Cintiq with those little legs when I'm just going to use the tablet mode with the pen and basically hide the rest of the keyboard. Now, to be 100% honest, this is just a keyboard. It looks really nice, and the split number pad piece makes it like a cool feature, but it's just that, it's just a keyboard. However, I personally think that this keyboard stands out on one specific aspect, which is customization. If you're into shortcuts and optimizing your workflows like I am, then it's definitely worth checking it out. Now, the best part of this customization is that you can map 12 shortcuts plus the extra 4 keys that you have in the number pad piece to every software that you have independently. So this little floating bar that you see here, that comes with the drivers, and it's just a visual indicator of the shortcuts that you have assigned to each application. And this works exactly in the same way as the 3 Space Mouse Pro. So for me, the number 2 button is to go into solo mode just for ZBrush. As long as my active window is ZBrush, this custom shortcut will simply isolate the subtool that I'm working with. If I go ahead and change to something else like Photoshop, have a look at what happens with the tiny shortcut bar. The icon changes to indicate that I have a different active window or a different application. And as you can see, I haven't set up all the shortcuts for Photoshop yet. However, if I go ahead and select the NumPad Pro, I have already assigned all the available 4 keys to custom shortcuts. So far, I found that the extra keys are really useful for different view modes in Photoshop. And again, this is just a personal workflow. So with the number 1, I can toggle the pattern view mode just to check if this pattern that I'm creating here is styling correctly. The number 2 just flips the document horizontally, which you won't see much change in this case, but it's something that I use a lot with composition. And finally, the number 3 and 4 toggles the fit to screen view and the actual size view of the document. Now for the number pad, I just assign a few different image adjustments that I use often for any given image. So number 1 brings the levels, number 2 brings the hue, saturation, and value sliders. The number 3 is just the color balance, and number 4 just launches the camera raw filter so I can do some fine-tuning of the image. Another set of really useful shortcuts that I've set up for my, let's say, daily routine are with the internet browser. So you can just go ahead and do the same thing and try it yourself. When I switch to Chrome, I have a different set of shortcuts that allows me to navigate faster. So I can go full screen with the number 1. I can go ahead and refresh the page with number 2 if it is not loading properly. And the number 3 and 4 are just to arrange the browser windows to the left or to the right side of the screen, respectively. I know this is probably not very exciting and you can do the same thing manually very quickly, but it makes a big difference over time the more that you use it, especially if you get used to your own set of keys and your own set of shortcuts. Alright, so that's it for this video. I hope that you find some of the customization tips I shared useful, and I'll see you in the next tutorial. Cheers!